of them. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Lois, can you read the statement of certification in the meeting?
Certification of meeting has been advertised according to Sunshine Law.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Venero.
Here.
Mr. Zumbri.
Here.
Mrs. Inaugurato.
Here.
Councilman Kennedy. Mr. Conti. Mr. Walsh.
Here.
Mrs. Shore.
Yes. Here.
Mr. Medicini. Mr. Anello. Mr. Sanabria.
Here.
Mr. Herrick.
Here.
Mr. DiBiase.
Here.
Mr. Di Lorenzo.
Here. There's no approval of minutes, there's no old business, there's no resolution, there's no new business. We have an application before the board. PB 2013-02, amendment to the ROCHE Diagnostic Redevelopment Plan, Block 2301, Lot 1.
And Mr. Chairman, for the record, you have asked that this be placed. Since you own property that is near this redevelopment plan, you will not be voting on the plan. However, procedurally, I see no reason why you cannot act as chairman, and then when the time for voting occurs, simply step down, sir.
Thank you.
Good evening. Anthony Rodriguez from the firm CME Associates in Howell.
Mr. Rodriguez, we're going to have you sworn again. You were on the oath at the last meeting.
Please raise your right hand. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
And again, Anthony Rodriguez, CME Associates, Howell, New Jersey. I was retained as a planner on this project to prepare an amendment to the ROCHE Diagnostic Redevelopment Plan. That's block 2301, lot 1, and it's 11 Franklin Avenue. The council recommended the amendment of the plan to include two new uses, a gasoline service station and convenience center, and also a self-storage facility. The plan amendment that's before you this evening for consideration includes those two uses as new permitted uses in the redevelopment area, and also establishes bulk and yard requirements for the gas station and convenience center, and also establishes off-street parking standards, signage amendments to accommodate the uses, and establishes definitions for each use. Really, the task of the planning board here tonight is to determine the redevelopment plan's consistency with the township master plan and master planning documents. And the redevelopment plan amendment on, page 11, discusses really largely the consistency of the 2013 redevelopment plan. The 2013 redevelopment plan goes through the same exercise of establishing that plan's consistency with the redevelopment plan, or with the master plan, I apologize. And really, for the most part, the consistency with the master plan remains the same. The amendment to the redevelopment plan is intended to advance several goals of the 2009 master plan. Goal 2, to encourage a balance of land uses, including diversified residential areas and commercial areas. Goal number 5, to provide for the rehabilitation or reconstruction of older non-residential areas to maintain existing jobs and produce new jobs. Goal number 6, to encourage the revitalization of business areas. The redevelopment plan establishes this area as a mixed-use non-residential district. Goal number 12, to enhance community appearance and the visual environment. And goal number 15, to conduct the township's planning program within the framework of a regional setting that's fully cognizant of the needs of Belleville's neighboring communities and Essex County. The 2009 master plan also identifies the ROCHE site as a major planning issue for Belleville. It talks about how the township is presented with a rare opportunity to create an attractive tax-generating employment center, and amended the land use plan to permit the redevelopment of an 18.5-acre ROCHE diagnostic tract as a mixed-use development which recognizes both the potential importance of the Clara Moss Medical Center as a future focal point for local and regional medical activities. So really expanding the types of permitted uses within the redevelopment area furthers these goals of the master plan. As I mentioned, there are specific standards established with respect to design and bulk standards for the area as well, to accommodate these new uses should they be developed. And that really is the essence of what's before you this evening. So with that said, if you have any questions at this time, I'm happy to answer them for you.
Yes, sir, I just have one question for
Sure.
the record. Within the framework of sound planning principles, do you recommend this amendment to the planning board and render an opinion that if the planning board accepts this amendment, that it would not negatively impact on the zone plan, the intent of the master plan, or in any way negatively impact on the character of the neighborhood?
That's my opinion, yes. In fact, I would argue that this plan and the amendment before you this evening really advances, it seeks to advance the master plan, to redevelop an area that's underutilized, that is intended for mixed-use development. Introducing these new types of uses furthers those goals and objectives of the master plan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Arlene?
The amendments to 2009 and 2013 plans and the permitted uses, if you go to page 15, not of the amendment, let's go to the revisions then. Yeah.
The 2013 plan,
Yeah,
the original
go
one?
to page 15. Right? There is just something that's listed on the top of that page. Do you see that?
The redevelopment plan proposes all the non-residential uses in the MXD district, that sentence?
Yes, and this is the sentence which I think that at first, when I was looking at this amendment, I really had some reservations, but this is why I think that we need to consider this, because we can't use it. Residential uses and child and adult care will not be permitted due to soil and groundwater contamination within the study area.
Correct.
Therefore, I feel that the way we're going to have to go with this is though it looks as though we could have mixed use with residential in this, we can't. And so that needs to be amended because this goes all the way back where it's there was some amendment already. And so my thoughts at first were across from Branchburg Park, near the hospital. I drove around and knew that on the north border we had 2 gas stations. So my question became, why do we need another one? And I did raise, well, storage unit, do we need other storage units considering that we have one on Franklin Street, we have one in the valley. However, these are non-residential. And we can, besides non-residential, we cannot have any educational options on this property. If we can't have daycare, we can't have schools. I mean, I'm making that assumption, though it specifically doesn't say it. So therefore, I think we're limited. And according to this plan, we talk about 70% non-urban. But honestly, if you read further into the original plan, what it does go into, and it says that we should encapsulate, or we should provide the type of buildings which have a covering foundation, which in effect take up 70%. So we're obligated to 70%, not maximum 70%. The recommendation is that we use 70%. Now, I might be wrong in reading this, but this is what I saw in these documents today. So, but we need to know, I think, when it comes to the permitted uses of this, we do need to take into account, because of a gas station, we need to take into account that we have a high-traffic area near the hospital already. That's a very, very busy light. We have emergency situations going into that area. So right now, there isn't a natural defined break when it comes to the gas station, considering the amount of traffic we would have. And do we necessarily need storage pad fronting on Franklin, though we have a 30% setback specified? do we need to have that storage site literally beginning to front on 30 feet? Or is there enough room to move something like that back? Because the amendment calls for facing of the walls only if they're facing street sides. Well, if it's not facing a street side, and if there's facing, and if it's facing a residential side, I would be concerned about that. The other concern that I have in reading this is that we have a 4-story height restriction, which is not objectionable, let's say, obviously near Franklin. But it would be an issue if the property went farther back and closer to Brighton, because it would affect, 4 stories would affect those residences. And so those are the things that I picked up. Thank you.
Would you like,
Well, yeah, just a couple things. If you read the provision, I think you're talking about, Mrs. Shore, 9C on page 6 of the amendment. That says, the architectural treatment of a facade shall be completely continued around all street-facing facades of a
Correct.
building. Then the next sentence says, all sides of a building shall be architecturally designed so as to be consistent with regard to style, materials, colors, and details.
Okay, now what threw me was it sentence began by
Right.
saying it would be street facing. And if it was someone's backyard, and if we didn't have facing, I was concerned about what, there would be, there are some residential areas in
Right.
the rear of the property. So that's why, yes, I'm sorry, I didn't read that. The other thing is on page 5. If you would please go to page 5.
Sure.
In regard to restaurants,
Mhm.
use and type, and we have parking ratios. And under restaurants, we have 1 space per 150 square feet. And though in some ways it makes sense, we have an ordinance that does not allow us to require, am I right or wrong? We have an ordinance that does not allow us to dictate how much parking space, it's not only Washington Avenue, it's townwide, how much parking space is needed for restaurants.
Right. This redevelopment plan essentially acts as zoning for this redevelopment area.
So it can override?
So it
Yes.
supersedes
Okay.
the underlying zone.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right.
And then the other thing, with respect to your concern in terms of proximity of certain uses to residential areas, the plan also requires a 50-foot buffer from any residential area.
No, I read that.
So from
And
that rear property line of the residence,
The buffer isn't the issue, but the restriction of height is 65 feet.
right,
So 65 feet when you have a 2-story house, 65 feet, even if you are 50 feet from it. I don't have an issue in general with the height on the frontage, but I do have an issue in the proximity of the building to a residential area. Specifically, I believe it's probably Brighton that I might be talking about.
Montgomery.
Acme, Montgomery, you know where I'm-
Montgomery, Acme.
Yeah, so it's the height right in that area. There's
Go ahead, Jerry.
Couple of questions. On your off-site parking spaces, you're not allowing any additional parking per employees?
I think, well, just for the record, most of these parking standards were established in the original plan. The only 2 that I added were for the 2 new uses. So that would be the bottom 2, the gasoline service station with convenience center, which is 1 space per 150 square feet, and the self-storage facility, which is 1 space per 5,500 square feet, or 0.75 spaces per 100 storage units, whichever is greater. Those parking standards come from the Parking Generation Manual, 4th edition, which is prepared by the Institute of Transportation Engineers. And it essentially contains, that manual contains several case studies from across the country that sort of establishes statistical analysis in terms of what is a 50th percentile parking ratio, what's an 85th percentile parking ratio, so on and so forth. So actually, these are the 85th percentile parking ratios, which errs on the conservative side in terms of what you see in overall demand of similar uses in other areas.
Okay, one other question. On page 13, your definition of self-storage facility is a structure rented to individuals only for short-term storage. What's your definition of short-term? Because I know a lot of the storage goes for 1, 2, 3-year contracts.
Right. I think the intent there is non-permanent storage. People...
6 months?
6 months, a year. I mean, I'm sure that there are people who use it for upwards of 5 years, so on and so forth. Short-term is essentially, to me, non-permanent in terms of one tenant occupying a space for 75, 99 years. I mean, it's a realistic possibility, but the intent is for people to use these to move things in and out. If they're moving, if they need access to certain things, certain times of the year, like Christmas decorations, for example, if you live in a small apartment. That's sort of the genesis behind the short-term provision in there.
Okay, so you're defining short-term as a maximum 6 months to 1 year.
I don't necessarily think we need to establish a maximum. I think the overall intent is to demonstrate the types of materials that can be stored in the building. I mean, we can certainly strike the short term. I mean, I guess theoretically there doesn't need to be a time limit. If that's something the board would like to recommend back to the council.
Why would there be a limit? That makes,
No. Sure. Well, why would you say it's only for short term?
strike short term.
Okay, so we'll strike short term.
One minor question, because I might be reading it wrong, so I just want a clarification. On page 5, under self-storage facility, I'm rereading this. A reduction in the minimum required parking ratio is permitted with a comprehensive parking plan for the entire, based on shared parking agreements on specific parking demand information, mass transit utilization, and use of on-street parking. I know that this is generally a standard phrase, but on-street parking, if it wasn't available in the frontage, which is obviously on Franklin Avenue, which it wouldn't be. My bigger concern would be if there was a second option to enter a site. From the rear of the site, it would be either through Acme or Brighton. So I would think that the board should consider that Brighton has a definite parking issue to begin with,
Oh,
that
yeah.
we wouldn't want.
That would, I think, the site plan, we'd address that. I think when we first discussed it, we said
Yeah,
there'd
but
be
I'm
no other
just bringing it up
entrances.
because it was in here
Right.
on
No problem.
page
And I
5.
think that's also in the 2013 plan regulates access in terms of from Franklin Avenue, not.
Yeah, but this was in the
Right,
revision
but to the
regarding
ex-
self-storage, that's what I'm
Well,
concerned
that's
about.
actually, again, this provision that you're referencing comes from the 2013 plan, which basically is saying, if you have a comprehensive redevelopment of the redevelopment area, somebody will come in all at once to redevelop the whole area. If that applicant can demonstrate to the board that certain uses have peak parking demand at certain times. For instance, offices and restaurants are typically a good example. Offices are generally occupied, peak parking demand is between 9 and 5, give or take a few. Generally, restaurants have the bulk of their traffic and the bulk of their parking demand at night. So where you have an instance where you have those complementary type of uses, you can demonstrate to a board during the site plan approval process, look, we have a mix of uses here that works in terms of a shared parking arrangement, here's how it's going to work, here are the numbers that we think we need, and it's really your decision as to whether or not you think that works based on the testimony of an expert. So it provides an opportunity to demonstrate that, but it doesn't necessarily require that. And I don't necessarily think that a self-storage use, given A, it has a very low parking demand, relatively speaking, and B, it's typically a self-sustaining use by itself. That doesn't necessarily, that's not going to work with shared parking.
I'm very familiar with self-storage facilities. I agree with you that parking is generally not an issue. My one concern was that the language, though it might have been from an old plan or the current plan, we had another issue this past summer by another board, and there was a discussion in the rear of that property on another case about availability of parking. We know that the parking would not affect Franklin Avenue, so I'm just concerned about even having the terminology in here as far as relationship of partnership agreements with on-street parking. Not an issue with transit, because we know where that is in proximity. We know where the lot is. The transit lot is in proximity diagonally across from the hospital on the other side. But an on-street in that area, in any type of partnership, would have a negative impact.
I had a question. It states here, the facility shall not provide outside storage, right? For recreation vehicle, boats?
Correct.
No outside
Right,
storage?
that's the intent there.
Okay. And the new amended plan encompasses the 2013 plan?
Right, to the extent that the 2013 plan is not amended by the 2016, which is before you this evening, the 2013 plan will continue to govern. So actually, the 2013 plan is attached as an appendix.
Okay, because it said, the original plan had a provision for a 1.5 acre park.
Right, and I didn't touch on that, so
So
that
that's still
continues, that's
included.
carried forward, yep.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions?
Are you going to discuss the park this evening? or
What part?
You're not 70% saying you didn't discuss the park.
We just brought up,
Yeah.
parking.
The
I
park,
just, the original plan called for a 1.5 acre park, and he's saying the new plan includes that also.
Who does include?
to the extent that the plan amendment before you this evening does not amend the 2013 plan, that 2013 plan is still in effect. So I didn't discuss anything about parks in the 2016 amendment, so that park recommendation, that park requirement continues to be
So
carried
that
forward.
park would be in the 30%, that would be.
Theoretically, yes, yeah.
Anybody else have any questions?
Okay, make a motion.
Would someone like to make a motion to approve this plan?
I'll make the motion to approve this plan
And recommend it to the council?
and recommend it to the council.
With the amendment to the self-storage facility definition.
With the
Taking out the
recommendations.
short-term
We're adopting
uses.
the board is adopting
Okay.
your recommendation.
Someone second it?
I'll second it.
Yeah, at this time, the chair would like to step down. And the vice chair will actually call the roll. Have the secretary call the roll, please.
Yes.
And all other members are eligible to vote, is that correct? No other conflicts?
And just, Lois, please call roll call. Yes. Mr. Zogby,
Yes.
Mrs. Inalderado,
Yes,
Mr. Walsh.
Yes.
Mrs. Short,
Yes.
Mr. Sanabria.
Yes.
Someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. Meeting is adjourned.